Hello, everybody, and welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of sports. And because football is finally over, now it's time to go to the next thing in the world of sports, college hoops. Tim, you hit with that step back fadeaway in your eyes for three, and you airballed it. Anyway,
Sounds like me.
yeah. But March Madness is a little bit ways away, as are the conference tournaments. So until then, we're just going to dip our foot in the water and go through some weekly reviews of what happened in the world of college basketball. We'll go over the AP poll, some risers, some fallers, some important games that happened. And then, Tim, you have your Tim's team of the week and the team to look out for next week. So without further ado, are you ready to go?
Let's run it.
Darn right. So let's go through the AP poll for week 16. Gonzaga tops the poll yet again with not much change in the top five, but just a little bit. Auburn has slid down from 2 to number 3 after their loss against the Florida Gators. Arizona has moved up in their place up to 2. Purdue and Kansas slide ahead of Kentucky. Tim, big Boilers guy, they're playing really well. Consistently been in the top 5 all year, so Purdue's been making some noise. Duke, Villanova, and Texas Tech have each gone up 2 spots to go to 7, 8, and 9 respectively. Baylor and Providence have gone down 3 to kind of round out the top 10. Some other notable risers and fallers in there. Arkansas had a really big week with a double-digit win against Tennessee on the road. They move up from 23 to 18. They move up 5 spots. They are our biggest riser. UConn also had a good week, moving up 3 spots. In St. Mary's, they weren't ranked last week. They now jump up to the 23rd spot. And some fallers from the AP poll. Michigan State, they were ranked 19th. They had a couple brutal losses, including Penn State. They are no longer ranked. Ohio State, they dropped 4 spots, and Wyoming, Mountain West, sadly, the Cowboys are no longer in the AP poll either. They have dropped from the top 25. So in terms of what happened this week, we got some really interesting games. Tim, you want to take away our first game that we have to cover?
Yeah, our first game of the week that we have here is from the Tuesday slot of previously number 4, Kentucky, dropping to number 16, Tennessee, 76-63. Tennessee just put together a really good game on that one. Kentucky usually finds its way through their big man. And on the glass, but they just weren't able to get a lot of their shots down that they wanted. And Tennessee just really held control most of the way and ended up putting together a really solid victory, which is what helped them move up and force Kentucky to drop a spot or two.
Yeah, it was definitely a huge a double-digit loss for Kentucky at home, I'm pretty sure. So that definitely plays a big part into why they dropped 2 spots in this rankings. I mean, granted, Tennessee is also a ranked team. They slot in at 17 in this week's AP poll. So by no means are they slouches, but you don't exactly expect Kentucky to drop that kind of a game by that big of a margin at home. But that wasn't the only big SEC upset that we had this week. The Auburn Tigers, who have spent a lot of the past couple of weeks at the top of the AP polls in the top 5, they were previously ranked 2nd. They lost to Florida in Gainesville, 63-62. Now, this was a loss that we didn't think was going to happen by any means, but in college basketball, literally anything can happen. It's not just March where that one happens. Florida put together a really good game trying to stop Jabari Smith, Auburn's highly touted draft prospect. And Tyree Appleby on Florida's side, he got it done, led the way with 26 points and handed the Auburn Tigers their 2nd straight road loss.
I thought this was a really interesting, at least a really interesting ending to that game because Auburn had a chance. And on the final possession, I mean, props to Florida for really messing with them, but they actually didn't even manage to get a shot off. which to me is pretty crazy with the game on the line. Even if last second you're not getting what you want, you at least try to throw something up. But they shook him up. They got him to not realize where the clock was at, and they weren't even able to get a shot off.
You got to have your head in the game when, the clock's running down, and to not even get a shot off. I think you're exactly right. That's just a credit to Florida. But, the SEC is definitely one of the toughest conferences in college basketball, and it's shaping up to be another wild season where come March in the conference tournament, I think it's completely wide open, where we don't know who's going to win. We'll have that video covering the SEC when that conference tournament's getting ready to go. But as far as who wins that tournament, we have no idea. The next game that we are going to cover is from the Wednesday slate, a Big 12 matchup, Baylor and Texas Tech. Texas Tech, a huge 10-point win, 83-73. And we'll get more on Texas Tech later because they've been absolutely on a tear, but just a huge, huge win against a very, very good Baylor team, the defending national champions. And that actually marks a sweep for them. They beat them in Waco, and then they beat them in Lubbock. So Texas Tech has been absolutely on fire as of late.
Yeah, really, really. The interesting point I think out of this one was the first Texas Tech loss for Baylor was kind of what started this, what I would call a mini skid for them, because they were looking real dominant for a while. And then all of a sudden now they've racked up a couple of losses. Texas Tech certainly seems to have their number. One of the key ones for this game was transfer Kevin O'Banner from the magic run of Oral Roberts last year.
The Oral Roberts darling next to Max Asmus transferred to Texas Tech, and he's making noise there now too.
Oh yeah, he's definitely found a good role for himself in that team. So yeah, like you said, we'll talk more about them later, but a real statement win for them, and they've showed that they are definitely the real deal in this year.
Yeah, Texas Tech is for real. The next game we have after that comes from Sunday, and that was a tough one to swallow. My Butler Bulldogs played host to the 8th ranked at the time Providence Friars, and
we're handing it to them for a while.
Butler's had a really interesting season, and watching the game, with 16 minutes to go, Butler had a 19-point lead. I mean, 43-24. They had shut Providence down. Providence was shooting poorly. Butler was playing well. And then in the last 16 minutes, the bottom absolutely falls out. Jared Bynum catches fire with 18 points, all coming in the second half or overtime.
And I don't know if they just opened up the baskets or something, or how you go from 24 points to obviously overtime included, but 71 at the end. Talk about just catching fire. That's hard to do.
Watching the game, it's almost like Providence couldn't miss. They were putting up 3-pointer after 3-pointer after 3-pointer, mid-range, under the basket, free throws. Everything was falling for the Friars. Ed Cooley, credit to him, he's done a fantastic job with this Friars team, and he has Providence in a really good position in a very, very highly competitive Big East this year. But for Butler, it's been a trend, a negative trend of blowing late leads, where this is not the first time that they have been up late in games. Against UConn at Hinkle, they led by 6 at the half. They lost that game. St. John's at Hinkle, they led by 6 with 14 to go, ended up losing that game. And now Providence. So they continue to struggle in crunch time. And it's not just blowing leads. There are so many examples where the first game against Providence, that was a 7-point loss. And then you go to heated rival Xavier in Cincinnati, you lose by 2, which that was a tough game to stomach. The St. John's loss, that was a 3-point loss. At Creighton, they lost by 2, and now against Providence, a 1-point loss in overtime. So the Bulldogs,
no stranger to close losses, especially in ones where you really had in your hands for for at least some point during the game.
Well, for whatever reason, the Butler Bulldogs just seem to fall apart and not get the job done, which, I mean, at least they're even in close games with teams that are much better than them.
Yeah, in theory, they shouldn't have really even had a chance in this Providence game, but they had a great showing for part of it. You just got to be able to finish it.
Yeah, however, if what separates the good teams from the not so good teams is when you have those leads, are you able to close out? Are you able to finish? And I think if Butler finishes and wins a couple of those games, they're seen as a much better team than they're actually perceived as now. So that was not a fun game to stomach.
One note kind of just from that topic, of course, like with like the like blowing leads for Butler specifically, you're clearly not the only team that kind of has that as a plague, because one of the a quote that I actually heard when I was watching one of the post game pressers from Coach Matt Painter of Purdue, which obviously is my team and whatnot. But Purdue has actually had some problem with that earlier on this year. Some ones they've barely squeaked out, other ones that they've given up. But something that he said that I don't know if necessarily Butler has fallen issue with the same problem is that sometimes when you get a lead, he said of like that 10, 12 point range, you start going away from what got you there. You start going for that home run, that kill shot to try to put the game away. And then all of a sudden it gives that opportunity to open that door and let teams back in. And that's honestly a big issue for a lot of teams is when you get that lead is you got to keep the foot on the gas with what works to get you there. You're not always just going to be able to get whatever you want all of a sudden now that you're up. You got to continue to do what got you there and got you that lead. So it's just an interesting point of view of how teams might be able to fix some of that issue of giving up so many of those leads.
Yeah, getting complacent and taking your foot off the gas, like you said, it definitely hurts. And teams that are good, teams that are hungry, and teams that know how to score quickly,
they'll find a way back.
Like that, they will find a way back. Yeah. So definitely an interesting future for my Butler Bulldogs as we enter the home stretch of the season and the Big East tournament. But we have one more game to cover, and it is by far the most fascinating out of all of them. Michigan and Wisconsin. And not even because of anything that happened during the game.
Nope.
Post-game.
Juwan Howard, this you?
Yeah. Juwan Howard in the post-game handshake gets on Wisconsin coach Greg Gard, and they had an exchange of words. And as people are clumping, Wisconsin assistant Joe Krabenhoff gets in the middle of the scrum, and Juwan Howard takes a swing.
Yeah, and that took a little swipe at him.
And that starts a huge melee. And the reaction from the sports world, I mean, they talked about it on First Take, where Stephen A. Smith and Kendrick Perkins are debating, should the post-game handshake be eliminated? Which I think that's a little bit overboard, if you ask me. But still, it is definitely the defining headline from this week in college basketball, right? Because when do you ever see a fight, like a full-blown
between coaches, I think is the weirdest thing. Because I mean, you see guys lose their temper all the time, whether it be during the game with a hard foul or just because something happened. But usually amongst coaches in not only college basketball, but specifically, I mean, this is Big Ten play. Usually there's a level of maturity and professionalism that needs to be kept. And Juwan Howard just kind of completely threw all that out the window. And it's a bad look, not only for him, but for the University of Michigan as a whole, because now they have to take action for this, knowing full well that him and then the two players that got involved sort of in this fight, throwing some hands as well, you know that's going to affect the end of their season as well. They've been on this push, trying to push themselves into
they've
bubble
been
contention.
On the bubble.
But you're pretty much, if you lose those three guys for even just like the rest of the regular season, you've almost killed your chances entirely of trying to push that final run getting into the tournament. So it's unfortunate not only for the university, but for all the guys on those on that team that are all trying to make that push as a unit. It's not something you want to see out of college basketball, although it does make for interesting headlines, that's for sure.
Yeah, it definitely gives us something to talk about. But as far as like in the locker room and with the universities. It's not exactly something that you want to see. And this isn't the first time that Juwan Howard has had a scuffle between him and a Big Ten coach where, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name. It was a couple years back when Michigan played Maryland, where Juwan Howard took a swipe at their coach. So this is not the first time that Juwan Howard has.
It's not a good example to set for your players.
So, and then you get into, oh, well, what's going to happen to Juwan Howard? What's going to happen to the players? Are they going to get suspended? I've even heard, is Juwan Howard going to get fired? Which
I don't think they're going to pull the trigger on firing him. I absolutely think
I thought that was
those guys are going to get
a little bit extreme.
To a certain extent.
Indefinite suspensions, yes. Firing,
no, I just don't see that happening. It'd be a really big. I think what it would take is even more like public pressure than it's gotten already.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think the pressure is going to be there. The pressure is there for action and kind of calling out that kind of behavior, but I don't think that there's really that many calls for him to get fired. And to be fair, I don't think it would be the right decision either. I think he just needs to understand and learn that as a Big Ten coach, as a coach in general, you can't have that type of behavior.
Well, especially not as one of the flagship programs of the Big Ten and NCAA. Michigan is one of the more historic and storied programs in college basketball. And Juwan Howard has been a big part of that history, both as a player and a coach, being a part of the Fab Five in the 90s. But it's not a good look for, like you stated, Michigan. It's not a good look for the Big Ten, and it's not a good look for people who look up to Juwan Howard and those Michigan players, because I know there are a lot of Michigan fans that definitely have some opinions about what happened in Madison on Sunday. So, yeah.
To be fair, I do believe from what I saw and heard, I do believe Juwan Howard had reason to be upset, because the way that the end of that game transpired, I can understand him being upset with the way some of those timeouts were called.
And that's what he said in the post-game press conference that he was upset about.
But that does not give you the right ever to take a swing on somebody, even if they're getting in your face. So I get why he was upset, but he absolutely took it too far. So
yeah,
just what it comes down to.
Michigan, Wisconsin brawl, not a good look for anybody. Definitely wraps up an exciting week of college basketball. And to wrap up this video, we are going to do, Tim, you have your team of the week. So just from the best of this week, what team really stood out to you and played well? So Tim, who is your team of the week?
Yeah, so looking back at this week, there were a lot of teams that had some great wins, some really statement wins. But when it comes down to the total volume of performance this week, it was really hard to look past Texas Tech. I mean, you look at two ranked wins, the first of them being the upset over previously number 7 Baylor, and the second one going and upsetting Texas. So to have two ranked wins was something that no other team this week had. They've been playing really good basketball. They've had some really great wins throughout the season, and they've been kind of working their way towards the end of the season, trying to keep building their resume to be one of the top seeds heading into this tournament. But they've got their pieces clicking at the right time. I think they've got their identity as a team down, which is really important for teams as they head into conference tournaments and March Madness. And overall, they've got all their pieces that they've brought in and guys that they've previously had. They're playing really good basketball right now. So Texas Tech was pretty much undoubtedly my team of the week. It was really hard to look past anybody but them.
Yeah, I mean, you sweep Baylor, and then you complete a sweep of
that alone is incredibly
Texas
impressive.
In Austin at home, and Texas Tech, they're in a powerhouse conference like the Big 12. They know who they are. They know who they want to be. They're firing on all cylinders, and they're playing their best basketball at the right time of the season. And that is going to be so important come the conference tournament and come the NCAA tournament. So Texas Tech, this is going to be a fun team to watch as we enter March. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. So
we're getting close.
So going into next week, Tim, you have a team to look out for next week. So who would that be?
Yeah, when looking out for teams out in the future, I kind of looked for notable games of what games could be particularly important in terms of them being good competitive games, but also being important to that individual team and the way the rest of their season is going to transpire. So for me, that upcoming team is going to be Wisconsin. They've got 2 games this upcoming week. First at Minnesota on Wednesday, and then on Saturday they're at Rutgers at the Rack.
At the Rack.
So you've got
family, religion, Rutgers basketball, like Jimmy V once said.
Family, religion, Rutgers basketball.
You know it. So it's like you've got 2 away games this week, which of course away games in the Big Ten are never easy. Now, granted, at Minnesota, I don't think should be too difficult of a game for Wisconsin, but once again, you never know. Minnesota has played some pretty good basketball at times this year, but teams have found particularly difficult, including Purdue, to beat Rutgers at the Rack this year. So them going to the Rack on Saturday is going to be a huge game for them heading into this final stretch of the season, because as of right now, Purdue is up a half game in the Big Ten standings. Purdue only plays 1 game this week, which is at Michigan State next Saturday. So if Wisconsin wins both and Purdue wins their 1 game on Saturday, then they will be up atop the Big Ten standings tied for first. So it's incredibly important for Wisconsin to win both of these to still have a chance of either winning the Big Ten outright or with a share of it. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they're able to do. One thing I think that's actually also important to note is, despite their games this week keeping them sort of on track, Purdue also is going to head then to Wisconsin the following week. But of course, that's outside of this week. But Wisconsin's got to keep playing some of their best basketball right now heading into that game, make sure they've got all the gears going so they can see if they could find a way to manage to sweep Purdue this year, which I sure don't want to happen. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, a lot of big time Big Ten implications coming up this next week for Wisconsin, for Purdue.
You've got so many of those teams that are
for the teams that are just jostling in the top. I mean, you say
if Rutgers pulls off this upset, all of a sudden they find themselves right up at the top there,
which is very possible, because Rutgers plays their best basketball at home. Rutgers is a scary team. So we'll look to see, with the Wisconsin Badgers led by Johnny Davis, one of the best players in the country, if they can continue playing pretty good basketball. But I think that's all we got for this week's episode of college basketball. We reviewed last week and gave a little bit of insight for this week. We'll have more college basketball content coming up, as well as some other sports. We'll see what we got cooking there, but we definitely have some fun content for you as March approaches. It's not March yet, but we're getting there. But until next time, like and subscribe for more Running the Table content, and we out.